You often hear when people are describing a romantic or interpersonal relationship, they'll say it's complicated. Well, the US-Saudi relationship, geopolitical alliance is complicated. They are more than a partnership of a trade alliance, and they are more than a military partnership. The US-Saudi alliance, the recycling of Saudi Arabia's revenue of US dollars into the global economy allows for what we call the petrodollar complex, which has allowed globalization and trade to expand. And it was essentially the regime that was adopted in 1973. Henry Kissinger, the Secretary of State, for President Nixon after Nixon had abandoned the gold standard in 1971. Again, the context behind the creation of the petrodollar complex was that U.S. oil production was declining in the 1970s, and they were no longer the marginal barrel of production, and they couldn't hold the gold standard. U.S. needed a new stable source of oil. U.S. wanted to maintain its dominance as the reserve currency in the world, so it asked that Saudi Arabia only sell oil in U.S. dollars, and Saudi Arabia had the largest excess capacity to stabilize the global oil market. Saudi Arabia has been in a constant geopolitical competition with Iran, and they've needed some security guarantees from the United States as those struggles have moved into their region through Yemen. And so the arrangement between the United States, in which the U.S. provides arms and security agreements for Saudi Arabia, protects them from their regional competitors, whereas Saudi Arabia provides oil and recycles the U.S. dollars into the global economic system, and so that Saudi Arabia then provides the anchor for the petrodollar system. The largest purchaser by far of a U.S. arms, military arms, is Saudi Arabia, and it's allowed Saudi Arabia to compete for regional Middle Eastern hegemony with Iran and with the U.S.'s support. So, in the past decade, the U.S.-Saudi Arabia relationship has started to deteriorate. And one of the primary reasons of this, which started about 10 years ago in terms of its emergence, was U.S. shale. This oil that has been found trapped in hard rock formations, the U.S. discovered a way to economically extract it. Through a process called fracking, or hydraulic fracturing of the rock. USA oil production went up from 5 million barrels to 13 million barrels a day through the addition of this shale oil. The U.S. became a net exporter of petroleum products. And so this need, where U.S. was consuming 5 million barrels of imported oil a day that they were getting primarily from Saudi Arabia, this need was diminished, dwindled, and in fact reversed itself to the point where the U.S. was an exporter of oil, and that, of course, broke down the petrodollar system. A journalist was named Jamal Khashoggi in 2018 was murdered. At least U.S. intelligence, or what we're led to believe by what we read from at least the Western papers, is that this was an assassination that was set up by the Saudi prince Mohammed bin Salman. And Trump tried to cover this assassination up. But Biden has used this as a wedge issue to put pressure on the prince. The U.S., of course, has been also getting in on the energy transition towards promoting electric vehicles and moving off of a reliance of oil. We'll talk about that more in detail in a subsequent video, a few videos down the road. But one of Biden's campaign promises was that he was going to end fossil fuels. Now, this is very naive because, of course, right now in the West, demand for oil continues to grow globally. And in the West, demand for oil has remained relatively constant at 45 million barrels a day, whereas we only produce 30 million barrels a day. And of course, that's kind of at the heart of our problems and conflict with Russia that we have right now. What we've seen is that, of course, as the U.S. became self-sufficient even a net exporter of oil, that Saudi Arabia had to look to other clients. So now they started to sell to China and India, and those clients have become more important to them than the United States. So to maintain, whereas China remains one of the world's largest, if not the world's largest, importers of oil. So they have been looking to maintain their global market share that's been slipping, Saudi Arabia in recent years, to China and India as their customers. Last summer, Biden went to visit Saudi Arabia to request that they expedite increased production from both Saudi Arabia and OPEC more broadly. There was a speech that MBS gave after Biden left that was quite critical of U.S. energy policy, which again we'll get to in a subsequent video more broadly about Western energy policy. But the highlights in terms of the key points that MBS made in that speech were that as follows. He said that Saudi Arabia would play some role in limiting climate change, but considerations must be given that different countries are at different stages of development. That was the first point. The second point was that Saudi Arabia would only put marginal investment in the future to boost oil production capacity. I believe right now Saudi Arabia is planning on increasing production by 1 million barrels a day sometime in 5 years from now. So to put in context, when the world is growing at a normal pace, oil demand is growing somewhere between 1 million and 2 million barrels a day. We will make the case to our Genusian audience in a subsequent video that we've had over $2 trillion worth of disinvestment in the oil industry since 2014, and that there are no global inventories left. That we're going to have a severe energy crisis coming, irrespective of how this issue with Russia and Ukraine get resolved. The third point then was obvious that since he refused to commit to additional capacity, he said it's up to the West to secure its own energy security. So if you think about that, what that means, it means that the United States, if they want to preserve the petrodollar system or the U.S. as the reserve dollar currency, that they're responsible effectively, if they want to stabilize oil prices in this environment, they have to come up with 15 million barrels of oil a day that are not being made in the West. Saudi Arabia has aligned itself with Russia and China, and the world's producers of stuff are basically in conflict with the world's consumers of stuff, which is the West. And they don't like the paper printing or the fact that the U.S. dollar there's been too much U.S. dollars put out there by the fiscal profligacy of the U.S. government. and they don't like getting paid in US dollars anymore. They don't see their customer long-term as the US, and so we're moving away from this unipolar world to a multipolar world.